So in this short lesson, we're going to be looking at the lithification of a rock. So if sediments are all loose, fine materials, either bigger or smaller, before they can become a rock, they need to be put together and glued together. And that's the two parts of lithification. Lithification just means production of a rock. So how do you make a rock? Well, in the case of sedimentary rock, you need to glue little parts together into a bigger rock. So it's two parts. You have compaction, where the material, the sediments, the particles are squished, usually by overriding or overlayering of material that's pushing down by gravity, and it squishes it. And the space between the pores, the little area between one grain and the next grain over, gets smaller and smaller. So when it's compacted, there's less loose, airy material, and it's very compact. All right, so it's compacted. And then if you have tiny grained rock, then it sits together even nicer. The bigger the rock, the more the spaces have to be, because you cannot put one rock exactly next to the next one. There's always going to be some spaces. But the smaller your material is, the less space is occupied by a bubble. And then the second part is cementation. So to cement these rocks together, you're going to need some kind of a mineral that's in water, and the water runs in between the cracks and the air spaces inside this loose material, and then as it percolates through, it sticks the particles together. So you essentially make a crystal out of it by this material that's dissolved. Normally it's minerals dissolved in the water, and then it comes in and the minerals stick the parts together, and you have essentially a cement. So since the sedimentary rock was sedimentary layers, and sediment is simply laid down at the bottom of a stream, that will always happen at a horizontal, because that's how gravity works. It always pushes towards to the center of the earth, and so all the sediments are pushed equally, and you end up with what's called a strata. And a strata is a layer, a horizontal layer, and you can usually see the difference between one layer and the layer above and below it. So they're normally distinct. And you can have really, really thick layers if you have tons and tons of material laid down all at once, or you can have very thin layers if you only had a little bit of material that was then glued together. And then that cementation is basically recorded in the width of that rock. How big of a layer was laid down at one time, or how big or small was that layer laid down. Anything that gets trapped in it, any living things, or even something that at one time had been living, or part of a living thing like a shell, or part of a tree, so a branch of a tree or a leaf, or even an entire organism, might be caught in these layers, and then the layers laid down on top of it, and then as it's compacted and cemented, it's trapped and is not allowed to decay, because if there's no way for microorganisms to get to it, it won't decay. And if it's laid down very quickly, so that there's no oxygen or there's no air that would have these microorganisms in them, you could end up with a complete fossil. And so sedimentary rocks are where you look for fossils. That's where fossils will be. So let's do a review. The rocks are classified, sedimentary rocks are classified as either detrital, which means small pieces of something that used to be a rock, or chemical, and the chemical is something that was dissolved. Normally it was a rock that was dissolved, usually by an acid, and then as it's dissolved, then those parts, the products of that chemical reaction, then can find each other and a new rock can be put together. You're also going to classify them by the size of the grains. So are they tiny, or are they very large? You would have a different named rock based upon not just what it's made out of, but how big that the parts that make up that rock are. And then the second question is how a sedimentary rock sediment transformed into a sedimentary rock. And that was the two parts of lithification, which is compaction, shoving them together to minimize the air spaces, and then water with a dissolved mineral in it that seeps through those spaces and glues all the particles together.